What goes into creating that victim mindset, and are we at a surging moment of a victim mindset?
Oh, yes. The second question, yes.
Yeah.
A victim mindset is when you believe that you sort of outsource all of your problems to the external world. Maybe it's an individual, or maybe it's you're saying a group is holding me back. You don't take responsibility for your reactions to the world because maybe trauma. You use the word trauma, and so you say that excuses you from how you show up or how you act in the world. And this is the most important part. You don't productively and constructively create a better future for yourself and come up with a plan to help you overcome the past. You stay enshrined in that past for as long as possible without there being any sort of hope.
What's the evidence that we are in a big surge of a victim mindset? Where does that come from?
Yeah, so Jean Twenge has done some really cool analyses in her book Generations, looking at past 3-4 generations. And what you see is there was a self-esteem movement in the 80s where, I don't know if anyone remembers Stuart Smalley, is that his name? From like, I'm smart enough, God dong it, people like me or something, whatever.
Yeah, that was the Al Franken character.
I'm not going to be here at the Comedy Cellar doing a Stuart Smalley impression, but and there was a self-esteem movement which morphed into a grandiose narcissism movement. So the generation after that, they thought, well, we're the best, we're superior, we're entitled to things because we're great. But that's not what it morphed into. So that actually morphed into something very interesting, which is a vulnerable narcissism movement. So now we have a generation being raised feeling as though they're entitled to special privileges, not because they're great, but just because of their fragility.
The baby boom was the first generation. It got raised after World War II in a land of plenty where things really opened up in a profound way for all sorts of people, women, being treated more equally with men, blacks, Asians, minorities kind of being more accepted. And they revolted against their parents, their parents who had survived the Depression, won World War II, and given them all of this. And then they were like, we're not going to be like you. But now it's the baby boom were the people who raise kids with this kind of false self-esteem. Is that kind of accurate?
Perhaps.
Okay.
Perhaps. There is a genetic component here. So we can't just strictly talk about environmental impact.
Yeah.
We also have to recognize that for instance, I talk about the personality trait neuroticism. Neuroticism is interestingly enough very strongly correlated with vulnerable narcissism. A lot of people might not think of neuroticism as...
Can you define neuroticism the way that you're using it real quick?
Yeah, it's a personality trait, part of the big five. So we have conscientiousness, we have agreeableness, extroversion, openness to new experiences. And then neuroticism is a particular personality trait where if you score high in neuroticism, you tend to ruminate a lot, you tend to be very anxious, you tend to have a lot of negative emotions and a lot of negative thoughts constantly. Your brain is like pumping you full of negative thoughts. And genes do play a role in that, in the development of a cognition that constantly is feeding you these kinds of thoughts and things. And I think the environment then can amplify neuroticism. And interestingly enough, I think we have an environment that's not only amplifying it, but rewarding neuroticism.
Explain that.
Welcome to social media. I think that you get a lot more attention in our tribal sort of universe that we live in by complaining, by ruminating, by all these cognitive distortions, that like Jonathan Haidt talks about and Greg Lukianoff in their book Coddling the American Mind. You see a lot of these cognitive distortions on the rise, which are correlated with the trait neuroticism.
Explain vulnerable narcissism as a term. This is not the first time that you're using it, but it's a big part of this book. What is vulnerable narcissism, and where does that come from?
It's a form of entitlement based on past suffering. So you feel like I've suffered more than everyone else. So it'd be, for example, you're at Starbucks and there's a huge line, and you're like, oh wow, I really should be the first one in line. I probably suffered more than everyone else in this line. There is a scale, and one of the items on the scale, my favorite items on the scale, is if I was on the Titanic when it was going down, I should get the first life raft because of all I've suffered.